LUCA then continued to evolve. So we're talking about the evolution of LUCA. Once the ribozyme eventually acquired additional tools, it became LUCA. So it started with an RNA molecule that then gained a certain shape, and then it gained the ability to replicate itself, but then it had environmental conditions, and those environmental conditions were harsh. I mean, there was a lot of turbulence in early Earth, right? And so those self-replicating molecules had a challenge, as do all living things today. They had to maintain homeostasis, which is the ability to stay, to keep things in an internal environment stable. And so to keep things stable in an internal environment, you must first have an internal environment. And so a likely next step was some sort of bubble. So deep in the hydrothermal vents, we learned about like smokers. The advantage to underwater conditions with smokers is perhaps there were lipids, like fat, maybe leached off of some mineral or something, and those create bubbles. A bubble of fat is basically what a lipid bilayer is, and that is the outside of a cell. So that created a nice internal environment that the RNA could be housed in. And then the next likely step was that RNA started to recruit proteins. So RNA has the ability to create proteins. So for example, you have an RNA molecule called a ribozyme. Brain fart here. A ribosome, which is a ribozyme, and it can make proteins for you. So it's very feasible and observed in lab that RNA can make proteins. So those proteins have some sort of function, and I'm going to draw legs on this. I don't know. Those proteins basically make the RNA more likely to survive, but it is still the RNA that is in control here. It is still the information that needs to be passed on. So the cell, LUCA itself, was just an add-on. It was just additional traits that the RNA used to continue to survive. And without them, it would have been outcompeted for. And so over time, the next step that happened was RNA required more and more information. RNA had to get bigger and bigger and bigger in order to make all these complicated proteins, and it just kept getting bigger until the point that it was just too much. So RNA had to make a more compressed version of itself. And so instead of RNA, that's too dark. Can't see that background. Instead of RNA, we made DNA. So that's what the next slide, I believe, is about. Yes. Okay. So that's basically it. Homeostasis was required, and natural selection with the selective pressures. Selective pressure, by the way, is a challenge to an organism's fitness. The selective pressures of early Earth reinforced homeostasis and made it so that RNA had to gain additional features, and that's what made it into LUCA.